Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the fifth and last of our webinar series on Medicare drug payments and how it impacts pharmaceutical company strategies. I am Pedro Salameo with Definitive Health Partners. For this webinar, we will be pulling out our crystal ball and anticipating the future of Medicare. And who better to predict the future than a former Medicare officer, John Warren with Gettysburg Healthcare Consulting. John, welcome back.
Hi, Pedro. Great to be back. Thanks for having me.
Great. So, although now we're looking at what the future holds, we want to remind everybody that for the past few webinars, we've looked at what is the makeup of Medicare, the importance of coverage coding reimbursement, and how to tie those into and approach Medicare to optimize your access. But, we want to, again, look at the future. So, John, as you know, back in February of this year, the Senate Finance Committee held a hearing to review the current and future state of Medicare. Specifically the financing. And based on this slide here, we can see that Medicare is flirting with insolvency. But never fear, this is not the first time that the US has gone through this. But as a life science company, I think it's important to understand how Medicare is viewing the upcoming inflection point. Can you give us some insight into that?
Yeah, Pedro. I mean, this is, as you've mentioned, this has been an ongoing issue for Medicare, for the Medicare program in general. And, I guess as with any company, Medicare can address this solvency crisis in one of two ways. First, they can find new sources of revenue or, increase the current flow of revenues, or they could reduce the amount of money that they spend. But really, neither of these options are particularly palatable to either lawmakers or to Medicare beneficiaries. It goes without saying, finding new revenues by substantially increasing premiums or by finding new sources of tax revenues aren't going to win a whole lot of votes for anybody. And in fact, those options are likely to alienate beneficiaries and taxpayers alike, which really leaves the need to look at ways to reduce spending. But similarly, making sizable cuts to benefits is a non-starter. So much of the discussion has focused on reforming the way that Medicare pays for the services it already provides. You and I have talked quite a bit about the Medicare Advantage program and how it was touted as the future direction of Medicare. And we've commented on how much and how greatly the MA program has expanded just over the past couple of years. But others have pointed out that the growth in the MA program has come along with actually increased, not decreased spending. And that really gives rise to questions about whether a managed Medicare program is a long-term solution. At the same time, though, policymakers have to wrestle with their goal of managing beneficiary out-of-pocket costs. And they're looking at ways to shift that financial responsibility, sometimes back to providers, but in the case of prescription drugs, back to manufacturers. But even when it comes to that issue, lawmakers are as divided as ever over how best to ensure that the Medicare program can remain solvent into the future.
Yeah. So in a world where there's such a divide amongst lawmakers, and where Congress is obviously up for grabs this fall, where do you think are the most what are the most likely scenarios to play out on Capitol Hill?
Yeah, talking specifically about reforming drug payments, you and I have also discussed that there's any number of different proposals that have been floated from Republicans and Democrats alike over the past couple of years, but really even back to the beginnings of the Medicare program. But only a handful of these ideas have been, if you will, shared by both sides of the aisle. Republicans and Democrats alike have argued that prescription drug price increases need to be kept in check. And both have argued that maybe using some sort of inflation-based metric is the right guardrail that they could use to manage those increases. They also have a shared concern about the inequities between prices paid in the US and the prices paid by international consumers for those same exact drugs. That's a concern on both sides of the aisle. And at the same time, both sides are strongly believe that allowing Medicare to negotiate prices, even for the most expensive prescription drugs, would lead to lower costs. They look at Medicare as having this tremendous buying power, and to be able to leverage that in the price negotiation process, they see as leading to lower costs for the program and less money out of pocket for beneficiaries,
Mhm.
which really leads into the next thing. Everyone's concerned about reducing the amount of out-of-pocket spending that beneficiaries are responsible for.
Sure.
We've heard discussions about reforms to the Part D program that would focus on reducing those out-of-pocket costs, reducing or eliminating that donut hole without affecting access to care. And then last but not least, I think both sides would also agree that the opaque nature of the prescription drug market, and particularly the expanding role and power of pharmacy benefit managers, have made it difficult, if not entirely impossible, to identify when and how the individual consumer benefits from rebates and discounted prices. I think both sides would argue that those discounts and those rebates need to be passed along to that end consumer to reduce the amount of money that they spend out of pocket. But even though both sides of the aisle may agree at sort of a macro level to all of these goals, there's really very little agreement about how to implement any of them. Pedro, I like to talk a lot about the policy side and about the beneficiary aspect of this, but we shouldn't forget that these policy changes would have significant impacts on the drug makers themselves. They're going to change the way these drug makers think about pricing their products initially, but also over time. They're going to probably think a little bit differently about the way they position their new products for market. How do you see drug makers thinking evolving over time so that they can prepare for and be ready for some of these potential scenarios that actually seem a little more inevitable than just potential?
Um, no, that's great. Well, John, first, I I think we need to keep in mind that although Medicare's goal is to ensure healthcare access to enrollees, research shows that this is not the case. Currently, there are concerns that insurers' efforts to restrict access are resulting in the erosion of coverage and patient access to Part D drugs, not the opposite. So if we take a step back and look at how the market is evolving, um, there are a number of restrictions that seem to be taking a stronger hold. Um, One of the things that seems to be a likely trend is limiting price increases. Now, this may significantly impact a manufacturer's ability to take price increases that are normally considered a given in certain cases. So this is going to cause a bit more reflection and cause pricing research to be a bit done a bit differently and take into account different scenarios. So and how we've seen some of our clients talk about this and how they're pricing out or how we're helping them with their pricing research. The second thing is to highlight the formulary pressures from PBMs and Med Advantage plans. Based on payer research we continue to conduct, payers are interested in improving clinical outcomes and controlling plan costs. No surprise there. And we believe that these will continue to be the primary drivers for plan design changes in the future. Um, you know, and there are a couple of things in the marketplace that are backing this up. One example is a report from the Department of Health and Human Services that escalated these specific concerns, revealing that Med Advantage plans have exhibited a pattern of denying PAs, prior authorizations, and payment requests that normally would be covered by traditional Medicare. Another example was in a recent survey that where tighter formulary designs received the most votes as benefit design features that may be expanded in the coming years. And keep in mind that due to more expensive specialty therapies, CMS is toying with the idea of allowing plans to implement a 5-tier formula, which I think you've mentioned here before. So what would this mean for our clients? Well, not only building a strong value proposition, but doing so in phase 3 with the clinical trial design in mind will be important. I mean, obviously getting ahead of that health economic story, building that strong value proposition will need to be thought of earlier in phase 3, and we're seeing a number of our clients doing that as well. In addition to the value proposition work, pricing research will have to consider additional specialty tiers, especially going to Medicare. That's obviously a concern anyway. But as always, comprehensive payer research will be paramount to optimize therapeutic access. No surprise there. And when we talk about out of pocket costs. We know that Medicare will not increase that or what they're spending. So the onus is really going to fall on the pharmaceutical companies, on the Med Advantage plans. And we know the payers over the last number of years have continued to try to push that over to the, life science companies. And then lastly, the government's authority to negotiate prescription drug prices, it's probably going to be a watered down version, but just being familiar with approaching CMS, again, that last webinar we spoke about, is going to be really important. You don't just come in and just, all right, here's the price we're going to pay. It is much more intricate in that process, right? And you mentioned it in the last webinar. That's one way to really get on their bad side, and then you're behind the 8 ball. So, John, we spent a bit of time where Medicare came from, is, and where it's going. If there's one thing we want to make sure that people watching this webinar take away, it's that Medicare is constantly evolving, right? And in order to maximize your success, people watching this webinar, it's crucial to have a team of experts that not only have the knowledge and expertise, but also understand the intricacies necessary to optimize your strategy. It would be our honor to partner with you and help you accomplish your goals. Once again, if you'd like to contact us, please, you can do so by reaching out directly via email or the web. Once again, I'd like to thank John Warren with Gettysburg Healthcare Consultants for joining us on these webinars. John, you are hands down my go-to resource for all things CMS, so thank you again.
Pedro, you're welcome. I'm happy to be here. And folks, please be sure to like this video and subscribe for more content in the future.
Great. Thanks, John. Take care, everyone.